Thanks, folks. Just a couple of, well, good morning to everyone, and we'll just wait for the little switch over then and the clicker. All right, people. See, that's why we need empathy with technology like this.
Now the remote. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so morning. I'm going to talk about the work that we've been doing in the city of Leeds in the UK, which is called Age-Friendly Smart City, and it took us a lot of time to understand what that actually means. But I'm going to sort of explain the work that we've done as a response to the theme of empathy. So while we've been trying to understand what is age-friendly and what is a smart city, I feel we've been learning a lot of lessons in empathy in how we work with people and how we work with technology and how we bring them together. So that's what I hope to share. Before I begin, given the current situation that's happening in Europe and the response to Germany, I think it's really inspiring. So I just wanted to make a point that when you are working with someone in a vulnerable position, it's not about us versus them. We can't afford to have an attitude where you're doing something to people because you want to help them. It's a case of collaboration. So how do you work with people? How do you spend time with people to discover a solution? And what I've noticed in Germany is, the individual and the community have suddenly realized they're part of this larger whole, and that's creating the movement. That's something I try and aspire to do in our projects as well, especially with the whole age-friendly smart city as well. So now my introduction. Thank you for the 2 job titles. What I usually tell people is my job title is Digital Plus insert buzzword here. So it changes every 3 or 6 months. In a slightly philosophical perspective, what I'm really interested in is the context and the values that we're choosing to define our digital identities as individuals, as organizations, and as cities. And in a more pragmatic way, I'm also really interested in creating the right sort of conditions so we move beyond the discussion and the discourse and get something done. So hopefully my talk will sort of swing between the 2 sides, the philosophical side and then doing something about it as well. So when it comes to things that are described as smart, my first experience, and I'm going a little off topic, was to do with breath and breathing. I spent about 3 years at a research lab in the UK where we were making something called biofeedback games, where young people, we wanted them to play games with their breath, and hopefully that would improve their behavior. So I was spending lots of time looking at yoga and pranayama and inhale and exhale and a whole lot of these things, and then creating algorithms for it. It was fun, but the biggest lesson was that, listen, if you want to use technology to try and change attitudes, behavior, or perception, you really have to focus on people. You have to understand what motivates them. Otherwise, if you lock yourself in a lab, create something that you think is going to change the world, and then you bring it out in the real world, everyone will be terrified, anxious, and afraid. So they're not going to use it in the way that you want them to. So after the sort of research, I got sick of tech for a while, so I set myself a goal. Let me work with breath for a while, but no technology. Went off to Japan because it is saturated with tech, and it was a nice contrast. Didn't speak the language, wasn't familiar with the culture, and I was running mindfulness workshops with someone who was an ex-children's TV presenter with 7-year-old children. But it was a great lesson because then you really had to focus, how do I communicate my message to the people so that they understand and suddenly overcome all the barriers. So it was a good lesson for me. And it sort of culminates in this statement that technology, again, is not an excuse to do something to people. At the best case scenario is you're using it to build positive relationships and new kinds of interactions where everyone can benefit. What you really have to do, especially in a smart city context, which I'm going to come to soon, is take time to observe, discover, and listen. So that was the idea with which we started our journey in the city, saying, right, how do we create an age-friendly smart city? Now, for those of you who work in technology, the good news is that whatever you want to do, someone has probably done it somewhere else. So you have a lot of choice in terms of the direction you don't want to take. And that's what we did. That was the point of our earlier research. So the first thing we did was we looked east. And in the east, there are a couple of cities that are building smart cities from the ground up. They come with a $40 billion bill, and they've got amazing technology. The thing is, in the UK, in these really old cities, we can't build them from the ground up. So that's not an option. And secondly, when you read about these cities, you always wonder, where are the people? What are they doing? So the sensors are talking to each other, which is great. But what about the communities? How will you cultivate those? And then when we looked west, everyone's trying to disrupt everything all the time. So this is one example where they've got a bus which has Wi-Fi, which has fresh juice, but the ticket costs $6. So what we don't want to do is create a solution that is accessible only for the few. So those were some of the first conditions that we set ourselves. So it was all about, okay, so how do we become more inclusive? How do we start from a space which is about real people's experiences? And how do we go and capture their needs? So our age-friendly smart city was going to have Internet of Things, it was going to have wearables, it was going to have open data, that's inevitable. But at the same time, it had to be about communities, individuals, and neighborhoods. So with this in mind, we started searching for inspiration again, and we found it in some great places. My favorite project is this one. So this is Bus Vol Verhalen. In Frisian, that means bus full of stories. We sort of came across this bus by accident when we were traveling between two towns in the north of the Netherlands. So in the Frisian province in the Netherlands, they're kind of unique because they have their own language. And 90% of the population understands or speaks this language. So they're trying to continue to make sure it's in the mainstream. And what's remarkable is, it's an elegant old school solution. They've gone to a bus and they've put a physical bookshelf at the back of the bus with books in Frisian. Yeah? So we were rummaging through these books, and then we came across this thing, this book title. It means Old Love, and it's a collection of love letters sent by couples over 6 to 7 decades. So this is really remarkable, you know, from a sort of empathetic perspective. If you want to try and create change, don't wait for people to come to you. Go to them with your offer, and make it easier for them to discover. So how does this relate to Leeds? The thing is, there are thousands of stories waiting to be shared. People are already telling their stories in the city. I'm sure that's the case here as well. I think it's our responsibility to make sure there's more visibility to those stories. And here are just 3 examples. So there's a charity called Black Health Initiative, and they're doing they did a project to share the contribution of nurses from the Afro-Caribbean community in the UK, which is a fantastic story that must be shared. On social media, you have individuals who are sharing these really detailed, poignant stories about looking after or caring for their elderly parents and relatives. That needs to be shared. And then finally, the city itself has a platform which has about 60,000 images. When you go there, you see lots of anecdotes. So how do we take those stories outside of the platform and share it with the city? So we said, fine, if we want to use Internet of Things, we're going to use a community focus, and can we ask ourselves the question, does IoT allow buses to become hubs for storytelling? And if you think about it, the next time you take a bus journey, you'll see old people, young people, all sorts of people. They're already intergenerational spaces. If people are already there, what can we do about social inclusion? So that was one of the aspirations we had. Now when it comes to smart devices with the individual focus, what really worries me is we're like, yeah, we can measure your heart rate, blood pressure, whatever, so we'll keep strapping things on you. Now that's kind of dangerous because you can create a different kind of social isolation, especially amongst the elderly. Yeah, let's just give them a machine that will measure everything, and when things go wrong, we'll get an email alert. I think that's a dangerous scenario. So what we were saying is, let's look at the smart stuff. Let's look at all the things you can do and then repurpose it. So the Apple iWatch thing. So do we give it to older people because it measures their heart rate, or do we give it to people who are at risk at dementia, so it tracks their movements and it gives them more confidence to get out of the city? There are 2 sides to this. Finally, when it comes to neighborhoods, so there's a statistic for London, which I think is sort of representative for the rest of the UK as well, which says that 14% of older people account for 14% of pedestrian casualties and 45% of pedestrian fatalities. So if we want to use data, let's try and use that data to figure out where older people live, where they go to socialize. That data is already available in your smart cards. And then start doing things like maybe slowing down traffic lights so it's easier for people to cross, or deploying street furniture. Can we have more benches where older people sort of travel? So the thing is, when you start thinking about a digital project, a smart city project in terms of individuals, communities and neighborhoods, there is no shortage of inspiration all across the world. So, have that sort of interdisciplinary hat. You don't have to look at technology to find inspiration for technology projects. Look at all the other people who are making unusual connections. Take the best of that and say, can we replicate some of that, but can technology be completely invisible in that process? And I'll give you a little example of that in a bit. So, beyond the buzzwords, how do we create an age-friendly smart city? We had sort of found an answer, which was, okay, it has to be individuals, communities and neighborhoods, but we want to empower them, the individuals and the communities, and we want to try and make neighborhoods safer. That is the philosophical side, but like I said, I also want to create the conditions for things to happen. So we created this action plan. We started with 4 development themes, and these are defined by the World Health Organization as well. When it comes to older people, so housing and social participation, health and access, transport and inclusion, outdoor spaces and safety. They're all kind of mega and they're all kind of scary. But we did some work to sort of narrow it down. More importantly, we also did some work in identifying our partners. So we don't want mega corporations, big IT firms and so on. At some point they will enter the discussion. Right now, we needed citizens. We needed service providers. These are your frontline staff, adult social care, healthcare workers and so on. And we needed technologists. Now these are independent technologists who live in the city. What I've noticed, having spent a year working with them, they love their city. They want to do something good, but they're also equally brilliant at what they do. So if you've got so much talent and energy, why don't we harness that and try and see what happens? So the first thing we did was we started an unconference. If you're going to get 3 groups of people who normally don't meet or speak to each other, you need to give them a space to get to know each other and sort of challenge their stereotypes. And I was so delighted when one technologist came to me and said, you know what, not all old people are racist, which is great. Once they sort of found common ground on that day, then we started running our innovation labs. Now the point of these labs was, on the one end we have these big picture, huge themes which have global consequences and so on. But what we wanted to do in a city context is say, what's the smallest possible step? Let's be pragmatic. Let's see what we can do to make a difference. Also a discipline for all of those 3 groups to say, right, can we start asking questions and can we listen to the response? When we got an idea, we started running those as community pilots. So, test and adapt. Okay, you've got a solution, fine. Let's give it over. Let's see how many different ways they can break it with. And if it still produces some sort of meaning, then we can scale. So 2 months into the project, we ran our first innovation lab, and I'm so proud of this solution. One older person asked us, okay, right, you want me to Skype, that's great, but why is it so difficult? If you think about it as well, you close your eyes, if you have a tablet, think about how many gestures and pokes and whatever you have to do just to load Skype. Yeah? And a technologist in the room, she understood that. She said, my grandmother, she's in Singapore, 12,000 miles away. When we want to have a Skype chat, it takes me 30 minutes. Or it takes her 30 minutes just to figure out what the hell to do with the bloody thing she's holding. And by that time, both of us are kind of frustrated and unhappy. So there was that shared space, that empathy there as well. And because they're game developers, they came up with this clever idea, which they've called Monster Mesh. And I don't think that name is going to stick. Where they said, let's remove everything that's a distraction. So they created this one box with a button. Now if you imagine people living on a tower block along a street or in a sheltered housing complex, when they all have this box, one person presses the button, everyone else who's part of that hyperlocal network can listen and join in if they want. It's as simple as that. And that's the box. It doesn't have to look super sexy. It just has to do the job. And it's made only of 11 parts. We took it to a sheltered housing complex and we trialed it with older people and they love it. They want to try and use it. So you take a step back from all of this madness and this fast-paced work and, you know, what is really happening here. And I think what's powerful is that this story started with a 97-year-old woman who speaks Javanese, is in Singapore, and she's trying to find a way to talk to her granddaughter. Granddaughter's created a solution which another 97-year-old lady in a sheltered housing complex wants to use because it allows her to keep in touch with her companions in the same sheltered housing complex. And I think that's the, you know, that's the magic that happens when you take time to listen and take small steps. So obviously our project doesn't stop here. What we've effectively done here as well, you know, in terms of people and projects, is we're working in an interdisciplinary way. I'm trying to find what are the different unusual combinations we can use to get people to work together and produce something exciting. So for the mesh, we had our technologists, we had the library service who want to do something interesting around digital literacy, and they connected us with older residents in the city, and we had sheltered housing complexes. For the next one, we have a hack space, we have a transport authority, and we have bus stops. For the one after that, we want street furniture and charities and universities. So everyone is welcome. The sensibility that we're trying to create is our city is the lab. You know, it has to be an open and inclusive project. It's not as locked in sort of four walls dreaming up sexy solutions which sort of stress everyone out. What we're trying to do is create technology, but at the same time introduce it to people, because at the end of the day, all our lives are going to be rich and messy and exciting and complex and intricate. And that's the best bit of the project. What we get out of it is, we should get real solutions, fingers crossed, but along the way, we'll be able to create new kinds of connections, and we'll also get genuine insight for ourselves. So if I summarize what our lessons in empathy have been so far, and I think this goes beyond working on a smart city project, is, you know, it's okay to want to try and change things, but if your disruption is without context, unfortunately it's kind of meaningless. Okay? Spend some time just figuring out why you're doing something. Take time to discover and listen to what's happening around you. What we've learned as well, you'll get insight from some really unusual places. And that's really exciting, you know. When you create this shared space for people to come on board, then these unexpected moments will genuinely make you happy, because they'll allow you to make new kinds of links. And in this sort of scenario, success isn't purely accounted for in financial terms. It's also about how open and inclusive you are being. And more importantly, if you do create something and it doesn't work, it's okay. So learning to be detached and not to be precious about the way you are creating things or what you're creating is the most important thing that's emerged for me and for the rest of the team that's been working on this project. So that's pretty much it from my side. Thank you very much.